Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Kiniry. I work at a company called Galois, which is in Portland, Oregon. And I also work for a daughter company called Free and Fair, which is a spin out of Galois. Now, I've been asked today to kick off this afternoon session about applications. And the thing that Galois has worked on historically for nearly 20 years, and the thing that I've worked on in much of my career, is in the main software and things like firmware and things like security and correctness. Galois is known for being a formal methods company, but more and more recently we've started to work on hardware. When we reflect on computer security today, we basically think of computer security in the field as whack-a-mole. Software has lots of bugs. None of us, to the closest approximation, have any good idea about how to write software without bugs. Commercial code, on average, has about a bug in every 20 lines of code, and most of those bugs are innocuous. They don't cause you a lot of stress or pain. Yes, some of them are more severe. Microsoft Word crashing on you and you losing an hour of work can make us all groan. But some of those bugs are leveraged by adversaries to create vulnerabilities and to cause problems like, for example, the WannaCry situation that we've seen recently in the media. Ransomware especially hitting small states and localities and bad guys asking for large piles of Bitcoin. Now, what this means is we're all trying to keep up and patch all these systems all the time. And unfortunately, the hardware does very, very little to help. We have seen dozens of generations of CPUs over the years that were designed without any security requirements in them. And good guys and bad guys discover vulnerabilities all the time, both in the software and now, more and more, in the hardware. And while we can fix the bugs in the software, it is often the case that we cannot fix the problems with the hardware. And it means that systems have to be redesigned. This leads to a situation where we are dealing in the world with trillions of lines of code, and therefore we have billions of bugs. I tried to approximate Carl Sagan there. This is untenable. It makes people like me have nightmares. It keeps us employed, but it's no fun at all. Now, the devil principally these days is in the devices. Hardware devices like USB sticks and things like that are routinely created with hardware IP that has no adversarial model at all. So essentially, you've built a system that has a bunch of ports for input and output, and the system blindly trusts whatever goes through those channels. And these devices never get patched in the field. You never get an upgrade for your USB hardware and the like. And systems get compromised, and it's not the user's fault. Now, this has gotten so bad these days that there's now a consumer market for hardware spy devices. You can, for example, go to Crowd Supply and buy one of these microcontrollers that fits in a USB slot for only $30. This is the kind of thing that we previously saw only nation states create, and now it is consumer electronics. What happens when the adversaries really decide to make a point? What happens when we move beyond things like Heartbleed and the like, and bad guys really decide to start to leverage our stack of bugs sitting on top of hardware that doesn't help? We really need to create a new generation of secure hardware from the ground up, as we heard about this morning. This is the point of the SITH program. Now, I've been asked to summarize SITH in a bit more detail than Jay led on earlier. I do not represent DARPA. This is my own point of view. They asked me to say that. Now, let's reflect on what security looks like in hardware before we leap into what SITH is about. Now, every piece of silicon is basically a really tiny distributed system. Things talk to each other over wires. And if you squint at it carefully enough, it harkens back to 20 years ago in my career when we worked on distributed systems. And you have dozens to hundreds of engineers with hundreds of persons' years of effort, writing millions of lines or reusing millions of lines of RTL with billions of transistors. If we zoom up a level to modern software systems, we're now dealing with a concurrent and distributed system at human scale. and you have approximately the same amount of effort flowing into the design and development of these systems. Lifting up to the top level, at modern global computation, we have global scale, concurrent and distributed system. It's the internet. It's what we all have in our pockets, on our cell phone and Android and our devices. The difference here is that at this level, security has become prolific. It is baked in. It is fundamental to the nature of the system as it has evolved over the years. It's not great. It's still not where it should be in some ways. But in general, as you build systems on the internet, you have security at your disposal. You have systems that in general don't trust each other and have to build some shared trust in order to communicate, coordinate, and compute. And you see a constant evolution of security technologies to mitigate threats at this scale. Now here's the problem. I just said that a CPU was a distributed system. So if we zoom back down to the fine grain of a modern SOC, what we have is a little tiny internet on a chip with no security, where nothing can be patched and only a handful of vendors create every subsystem. And no one wants to pay it forward. That's what we're dealing with modern hardware today. Now, SITH is trying to do something constructive about this. The idea of SITH is to help you balance that forward paying for security against the other kinds of things that we have traditionally came to know and love about our hardware. Historically, we can't really blame companies for building and selling fast CPUs because consumers said, I want fast CPUs. They didn't say, I want fast, secure CPUs. So companies have been prioritizing exactly what their customers asked for, whether it was high performance, low power, or low area, PPA. Now our priorities are shifting, particularly in the DoD and other government agencies, but now more and more in large companies that build products that are in our pockets that are protecting our personal information, whether it's health records or your bank information. So we have to figure out a way to balance measures of power, performance, and area against notions of security. And that is at the core of the SITH program. SITH, in a nutshell, is secure hardware for the win. The idea here is to eliminate most classes of software vulnerabilities that we all struggle with every day in the design and development of secure software systems inside the hardware. In the SITH program, open source, soft core RISC-V processors running on high-end Xilinx FPGAs is the demo platform. There are 6 teams in SITH developing a total of 18 processors. Each team takes a baseline RISC-V processor that has no security baked in and augments it with their own secret sauce. One of those processors is a 32-bit microcontroller, and the other 2 are 64-bit CPUs, one of which is superscalar. These security approaches that we see in SITH are all over the map. Everything from tagged architectures to novel new generations of enclaves, novel forms of cryptography, and even AI to detect adversarial activities inside of chips. Now, what does it mean for a CPU to be secure in the context of SITH? These SITH CPUs have to be backwards compatible. They have to run normal software that you already have lying around. In this case, things like Linux running on a RISC-V processor. Those binaries have millions of bugs. We already know that. So the point here is that the CPUs being developed have to mitigate certain classes of vulnerabilities as identified by NIST and MITRE in what's called the Common Weakness Enumeration. This is effectively a tree of vulnerability classes of different kinds, and each SITH performer has to come up with their own secret sauce to focus in on different subtrees of this big tree of awfulness. For example, early in the program, CPUs that are under development are meant to mitigate all forms of memory and buffer errors, as well as information leakage vulnerabilities. Effectively, if you have a strong defensive mechanism at the hardware level, then you snip off entire subtrees, and those vulnerabilities disappear. Now, the software may still have that vulnerability, and therefore the chip, in detecting the problem, needs to either mitigate on the fly or signal in some fashion that bad stuff has happened. Sometimes it might just kill the process in question. Sometimes it might give feedback to the user. Each team is doing a different kind of thing. SITH'S CPUs, by the end of the program, have to mitigate 7 major classes of vulnerabilities, the 2 I mentioned, and others, including things like arithmetic errors, crypto errors, and even code injection. Now, our role in SITH at my company, Galois, is to make precise what these 7 classes of vulnerabilities are. What is a memory error and how does it relate to matters of software and a microarchitecture in the context of RISC-V. We have to build tools that integrate with normal design flows and generate evidence that a given SOC is in fact correct and secure. We are building a bridge between these worlds of software and hardware that people typically don't walk over, and doing it in a way that recognizes the fact that the average hardware engineer knows about as much about security as my mom. My mom's great, by the way. We're also creating new EDA tools that help hardware designers objectively measure these metrics I mentioned before: power, performance, area, and security, and optimize their SOC design. And this is indeed meant to be fully automated. The tools, which in the main are developed with formal methods, suck in designs in languages like Chisel, BlueSpec, and System Verilog, analyze those designs, and figure out every derivable CPU that you could have built with that pile of RTL, and then helps you explore that design space measuring PPAS, power, performance, area, security. That way you can give an objective function for what is perfect for you in your situation. I need this much power at most. I don't mind if my area goes high. I want this much security, and the tools will help you find that design. These tools are built with front ends that are familiar to developers who are using things like Cadence, Synopsys, and Mentor graphics tools, and integrate with those EDA tools from the commercial industry. It makes these PPAS trade-offs, or what are known as swap trade-offs in other parts of the DoD, evidence-based and transparent and traceable. Now, red teaming a secure CPU is a hard thing. It's the kind of thing that me and my colleagues have been hired to do in the past. Even focusing in on red teaming a single CPU can be very labor-intensive and very costly. How do you possibly evaluate 18 different CPUs, which in turn run 3 different operating systems across 6 different compilers? It's a bit of a nightmare. A set of red teams to accomplish that task might take longer than the duration of the entire program and might cost a very large pile of money. And the interesting thing that really throws normal red teamers for a loop is that these systems are meant to be secure even though their entire designs, down to the circuit level, are public. We publish everything about the systems, the compilers, the hardware designs, all the software stacks, and you presume compromise. You presume the bad guy is already inside the gates and can run malware on your device, and you still need to operate correctly. That's the ambition of the program. How do we execute on that? I won't put words in DARPA's mouth, but it seems like they've decided to open up red teaming to the world and go beyond public exercises we've seen in the past, like the DARPA Urban Challenge and the CGC. And they've decided to kick off a security evaluation in Las Vegas at DEF CON in a few weeks. So I am very busy right now. Additionally, because these CPUs we're developing run on high-end Xilinx FPGAs, which are very costly, we want to democratize red teaming and develop a variant that will run on low-cost FPGAs that run with open source design tools. So we're tasked with doing that as well. But what makes for a great demonstrator for secure hardware? Yes, initially we talked about things like fake radar systems and fake military vehicles or something that riffed on the DoD mission. But for one reason or another, when you look down the list of what would make for a great secure hardware demonstrator, moderately complex, unclassified, the public gets it, I can explain it to my mom, I love my mom, Topical with regards to today's adversaries, public good impact, et cetera, we need a system that fits that model. And what DARPA has decided to do is to develop a demonstrator voting system on top of SITH'S CPUs. Part of the reason I suspect this is a good idea is that election technology is on everybody's mind. Everybody in this room has read about some of the horrific things that happen with our election systems, both in the USA and abroad. You may have heard about people hacking on these voting systems in the past. I may have been responsible for that for a long time. And it's notorious for being an insecure domain. And the interesting thing is a modern voting system needs a microcontroller that goes inside the ballot box where you stick your piece of paper. Paper is necessary and fundamental. We don't get away from paper ballot records. We need desktop CPUs for things like the poll book where you check in, or a ballot marking device usable by the disabled, or a hand-marked paper ballot scanning device. And a superscalar CPU is necessary for things like homomorphic tabulation and reporting evidence to the public. And in general, in the domain of elections, most people who are rational argue that these systems should be open hardware and open software. Therefore, we have been building this system on top of these SITH'S CPUs. This is a photo of the demo system that will be at DEF CON in a few weeks. It has a ballot marking device running on a normal Dell touchscreen system, running Linux. It has a printer next to it, which is where your ballot comes out. It is usable by the disabled. It is accessible. You can vote on it as a blind person. And next to it is what we call the smart ballot box. That is the place where you can slide in your piece of paper and it recognizes whether or not your ballot is a legitimate ballot and permits you to either cast that ballot or spoil the ballot and return it if in fact you found out that you filled out your ballot wrong. Now, the community reaction to the announcement that DARPA has decided to build such a demonstration system, not a product, but mostly a janky demo on top of SITH'S CPUs, has been quite remarkable. And partly the reason for that is there hasn't been a lot of investment in election technology from the federal government over the past 20 years, outside of a huge outlay of buying insecure systems back in 2003 and 2004. And over the past 20 years, we at Galois have developed a good working relationship with many of the actors in this space. So when they heard that we were doing this particular demonstration work for DARPA, the reaction has been quite positive and quite enthusiastic so far. Now, this impact of SITH is to show the world that you can, in fact, build critical infrastructure and national security systems that can be transparent, correct, and secure. And this voting system is nothing more than a case study in formal methods as applied to layered security, moving from software to firmware and down into hardware. And to show that we can tackle these challenges in a very pragmatic sense. Not everybody has to be a cryptographer or a mathematician in order to use these new generations of EDA tools that understand security and have security baked into their core. And hopefully this will influence perceptions, not just from the public or what we might want in our pockets with regards to security, but also with regards to corporations. How do EDA tool vendors evolve? How do major chip manufacturers evolve? How do they bring to the fore new generations of secure CPUs that balance power, performance, area, and paying forward for security? And hopefully this will boost security capabilities across hardware available today without forcing everyone to become an expert in cybersecurity. We hope that SITH will help everyone create new generations of silicon that can tackle the 21st century security challenges. And I hope you'll pay attention to what's happening at DEF CON in August, this year and next, because next year we will be bringing not just the first few CPUs that will be available, but something close to 18 CPUs in a much larger demonstration system. Thank you. I now get to introduce my colleague, Professor Todd Austin from the University of Michigan down the road. He'll be telling us, he's a PI in SITH as well, and he'll be telling us about his work on his MORPHEUS chip, which I have to admit, when I first read his proposal, I thought he's crazy. But I dig Todd. He does crazy good work too. Thank you very much.
Did you ever wonder why every time you turn on the tech news, there's some new security vulnerability that has all the software and hardware vendors scrambling to protect their systems? Quite simply, that's because we don't know how to build systems that cannot be hacked. I'm not saying we're bad at security. We're actually pretty good at some aspects of security. For example, we're really good at finding and fixing vulnerabilities. And there's powerful tools, open source and in the marketplace, that can help us do that better all the time. And we're also pretty good at deploying defenses that can stop well-known attacks. And hardware and software vendors are doing this more and more every day. What we're really bad at is stopping emergent attacks. Secretary Rumsfeld called these emerging threats the unknown unknowns, because these are threats that are unknown to us because they'll be invented in the future and discovered in the future. Now, it may seem unfair to say that hardware and software vendors have to build systems that can protect themselves against threats that are discovered in the future, but the reality of today's world is when those systems go into the field, people will discover vulnerabilities in those systems, and they won't wait for us to patch them before they start to attack every vulnerable system that's out there. The week I made this talk, there were 4 vulnerabilities that were disclosed, emergent vulnerabilities, that left literally hundreds of millions of systems subject to those particular vulnerabilities, waiting for exploits to be crafted. The goal of our project, called the MORPHEUS project, is to develop a secure architecture that can start to address these emergent attacks. An architecture that can stop an attack that is invented in the future. So let me indulge myself here and just describe to you what a system would look like if it could stop emergent attacks. First, it would be lightning fast at stopping any attack that was common, because common attacks we know about, that's easy. When it was faced with an emergent attack, an attack it had never seen before, it'd have to quickly adapt itself to stop that particular attack. And once it successfully did that, it should learn and prioritize the defenses that were most effective against that new attack so that in the future, it could have stopped that particular attack more quickly. And then finally, we need to protect the defenses themselves. So ideally, we want a system where the defenses are protected, self-protected against the same mechanisms using perhaps a distributed implementation so that the attackers couldn't attack our defenses. Now, as a security researcher, I can tell you no electronic system possesses these particular capabilities today. We're working on it in SITH, but today they don't. But fortunately, there is a biological system that possesses all of these particular features, and that's the human immune system. And we can study the human immune system to figure out how to create this type of secure system in the computer world. Specifically, I'm referring to the adaptive immune system. It's one of the 3 subsystems of your immune system, and it's implemented by the T cells inside your body. So now, let's do a bio deep dive, one slide on the human adaptive immune system to see how it works and how it's kept human populations alive for countless generations despite an ever-changing landscape of viruses and bacteria. Inside your body are these T cells. T cells have receptors, and they're able to distinguish your cells from non-you or foreign cells, which are typically malicious pathogens. And when they identify one of these malicious pathogens, they destroy it by eating it. They do this via genetic markers, and inside your body at any one moment, the T cells can recognize about 10 to the 7 diseases. But the challenge is, epidemiologists estimate that you could be exposed up to 10 to the 15 different diseases in your lifetime. The key takeaway there is when a pathogen enters your body, it's very likely you have 0 defense against that pathogen. When an unknown disease enters your body, the T cells undergo a process called hypermutation, where they quickly randomize their DNA to create new defense capabilities on the fly. If your immune system is healthy, you will very likely within a few days, during those days you'll feel sick when that process is going on, very likely find a T cell variant that can stop the disease that's entered your body. And when that happens, that particular T cell will graduate into what's called a memory cell. Memory cells are long-lived T-cell variants, and they live for up to a decade, and that's what gives you immunity against diseases. In fact, all of the memory cells in your body form the immunological memory that helps you fight the diseases you've encountered in your lifetime. MORPHEUS mimics the human adaptive immune system directly. Like the human immune system, MORPHEUS has attack detectors which can detect normal programs from malicious programs. And we do that using a very novel technique that we developed, which identifies the use of undefined semantics. Undefined semantics are what attackers use to trick programs into stepping around their own security measures. More specifically, undefined semantics are execution semantics that are not written down anywhere that's public. They are not specifically defined. And so that way they're loose and you can take advantage of them as an attacker. Unfortunately, we can't eliminate undefined semantics from systems because most of them come from the implementation of the system. So if we were to say no more undefined semantics, we would have to define everyone use this version of this compiler, everyone use this particular microarchitecture. It'd be at the same time anti-innovative and anti-competitive. So undefined semantics are everywhere and they're here to stay. Let's take a quick little example of a buffer overflow attack and how it uses 3 undefined semantics to make that function called a vulnerable, instead of returning to main, return to target. The first undefined semantic that's utilized is a buffer overflow. To get access to arbitrary memory, the attacker does this. This is an undefined semantic in the C language. The second thing the attacker does is the attacker forges an address to the target function. The representation of those pointer addresses is an undefined semantic in the architecture. And then finally, the attacker overwrites the return address of vulnerable to get it to jump to their code location. That is yet another third undefined semantic. The way MORPHEUS stops these attacks and other attacks is by simply randomizing the undefined semantics. Undefined semantics are undefined, so if you change them, they don't break normal programs, but they do break malicious programs. So we randomize the undefined semantics while the system is in operation. And to make the system extremely robust against attacks, we repeatedly re-randomize the undefined semantics in a process we call churn. Churning undefined semantics breaks security attacks that use those undefined semantics. And there's only a handful of undefined semantics in the world today. And like the human immune system, we can record when we see a new type of attack, what were the defenses that were most effective against it, and we can reprioritize those defenses in the future and shut it down more quickly. Now let's just take one brief moment to see how MORPHEUS can stop an attack that was invented after MORPHEUS. In a conventional security attack, almost all the undefined semantics of the systems are well understood. That's what security attackers study. That's their whole life. And so with a very brief amount of time, attackers can synthesize and launch a successful attack. When you take a system and you randomize all of its undefined semantics, it's incredibly hard to attack, but it's certainly not impossible to attack. And with hours to days of probing of that system, attackers can rediscover the undefined semantics of the system and once again synthesize and launch a successful attack. The special sauce in MORPHEUS is we repeatedly churn the undefined semantics. That creates a time limit on the attackers. It takes you hours to days to understand those undefined semantics. Now you got 50 milliseconds. Good luck. And if they can't get over that hump, if they can't get that discovery within 50 milliseconds, they just probe forever. They can't discover the information they need to do that. And with learning mechanisms, we can prioritize our defenses better, and we can even squeeze that time down. Today, we are literally tens of thousands of times faster at churning than the expected time it would take to discover those undefined semantics. I think Secretary Rumsfeld would be very delighted to learn that we are starting to address the unknown unknowns of computer security. We are part of the DARPA SITH'S program, as Dr. Kiniry talked about earlier, under Program Manager Linton Salmon, where we've been developing a secure CPU with the MORPHEUS technology. We're a team of researchers from University of Michigan, Princeton University, and University of Texas at Austin. And our early results using simulation-based analysis are very promising. With 504 bits of entropy in the undefined semantics. So you got to guess all 504 bits to know the exact undefined semantics. and then churning that every 50 milliseconds. For typical programs, it's about a 2% slowdown. We bake this into the architecture so that we can do it in as efficient a manner as possible. About a 2.5% power overhead. The area cost to implement this infrastructure is about 8% over a small embedded processor. And we ported millions of lines of normal code to this platform, and it's unaffected by this churning mechanism so far. Now, normal programs are not affected, but malicious programs are dreadfully affected by churning undefined semantics. And what we found is that attacks that have been disclosed after we developed our architecture, we still have protections for those new attacks if they use the undefined semantics that we churn. We're really excited to get this technology out into the field for two reasons. One, we want people to be able to use this technology in their products, so we have a commercialization effort going on. And two, we want this in the hands of the world's best attackers so that they can validate our claims to strong security. In that regard, we have two efforts going on. I'm co-founder of Agita Labs, which is commercializing the MORPHEUS architecture. We're integrating that technology into the RISC-V ecosystem, and we're initially targeting server and IoT markets with FPGA and ASIC-based secure CPUs. And we're also developing two technology demonstrations to get these secure architectures into the hands of the world's best attackers. As Dr. Kiniry talked about earlier, we're taking part in the DEF CON voting machine hacking event. And then we also have a second national defense-oriented demonstration, which we're hoping to announce very soon. I'd be absolutely delighted to speak to anybody about this technology. I'll be here for the entire ERI event. Otherwise, visit our website. And thank you so much for your time.